With that, let me start by making 2 points about what sequestration is not. It's not an asteroid that's about to hit the Earth and annihilate life as we know it. And we are not dinosaurs waiting for the inevitable. In fact, if you want to compare it to anything, think about climate change. I'll go into this a little bit more later if you'd like, but sequestration is already happening. It's having some effect, although it's hard to determine. A few people are happy about it. Most people are worried about what it means. And the future is much more uncertain than what has happened so far. The second thing to keep in mind is that sequestration is the law. And as much as some of us would like it to go away, that's not going to happen unless Congress takes specific steps to change a law that it's passed and the president has signed. So rhetoric notwithstanding, and that includes, tonight's State of the Union address by the president, as well as, daily sound bites by the House Republican leadership, the Senate Democratic leadership, and anyone else. That's not the same thing as the reality. So let's talk a little bit about what the reality is. I found that the best way to think about sequestration is as a number, because in the end, budgets come down to numbers. And what it is a lower ceiling on the amount of money that Congress has said the government can spend. Now, specifically, that's a category called domestic discretionary funding, or discretionary funding most broadly. And that number, and here's something to keep in your head, for 2013 fiscal year, which is the year we're in, is $974 billion. Now, the significance of that number is how it compares to what current spending and what the 2013 budget was going to be. And that number, here's a second number, is $1.043 trillion, roughly $69 billion higher. Now, the reason that's important, and the reason I'm mentioning those two numbers, is that people talk about sequestration often as this blunt, across-the-board axe. Well, let's leave the adjectives aside. What it is a ceiling on how much money the government can spend. And what I think people have slowly started to realize in the last several weeks, even though we've had sequestration for over a year, is that that number has replaced a previous number that Congress set for spending. And the difference between that 1.043 and the 974 is really no different than any other piece of appropriations legislation that Congress has passed in previous years. Yes, sequestration lowers that amount in a way that cuts across the board, that affects every agency. But when you think about it, that's usually what Congress does. Congress says, this is how much money you have to spend, and maybe the next year it's this, and maybe the next year it's this. But it's usually a blanket increase or reduction. In fact, When it's not across the board, a lot of people complain that Congress is micromanaging. If they say, take $100 million from biological and environmental research at the Department of Energy Office of Science and put it in advanced computing, the community gets upset and says, how does Congress know that that's where the money should go? So across the board is not a new phenomenon, and I'll get into in a few minutes. In many ways, across the board is something that agencies prefer to deal with because it gives them flexibility. The difference is that it's a dramatic reduction. Obviously, that's what's gotten people's attention. So what is it? It affects everyone. It comes from a budget agreement that was reached in the summer of 2011. And that was an agreement that over the next 10 years, we would spend $1.2 trillion less. Now, if you break that down over 10 years with some minor variations, you come up with a figure of $109 billion in the first year, meaning 2013.